Hello, hello. I hope that you are doing well and taking good care of yourself. My name is Nompumelelo Prudence Gubega. I'm a clinical psychologist and also a traditional healer. I am based in Joburg South in South Africa. Welcome to Black Couch Podcast. I am very happy to have you here, and today's topic is managing adult tantrums, managing a dysregulated adult. Um, I think most of us growing up, we had to learn on how to take care of our emotions and how to also show up in a way that is acceptable to the society and also that is more acceptable as kids and also as adults. So, before I get into the adult tantrums, I think the most important thing is to actually define what emotional dysregulation is. So, it is when a person has difficulty managing or responding to their emotional experiences in a balanced way. It can show up as intense mood swings, overreaction, or difficulty calming down after stress. And what happens in those instances, you find that it creates a lot of misunderstandings and also conflict with regards to how a person responds when they are emotionally dysregulated. It affects their relationships, whether with friends, family, or even romantic partners. You find that someone that is an adult that is emotionally dysregulated reacts very impulsively, and sometimes what happens is the people around them become overwhelmed or confused by their reaction to a point that it ends up straining the trust or also connection. But where does this all start? So, how it starts is when like when a baby comes into the world or an infant comes into the world, and it's either they coming into a dysfunctional environment or a depressed mother or a mother that abandons them or a mother that has passes away, or a caregiver in a way that um, a caregiver that is not emotionally present to regulate the infant or the baby's emotions or a child's emotions to a point that they are then able to start being able to regulate themselves. An example, I think most of us, especially South Africans, can resonate to that. Like when a child would maybe get hit by a table. They go and they play close to the table and they end up getting hurt. And then what a child does is they would, because they don't have the capacity to understand that the table didn't hit them. It's them that went to the table, and that's how they ended up getting hurt. What happens is they would then go to the caregiver, right, crying and then saying, the table hit me, right? And when they do that, they then come back, and the mom would then, or caregiver would then go to the table and start hitting the table. Why are you hurting my child? Why are you hurting my child? And then the child will now wipe their tears, or mom will wipe their tears, and then they would be, oh, okay, now I'm fine because mom took care of me, right? Mom is my protector. Mom helps me to regulate my emotions. She helps me not to overreact when it comes to my emotions. And that's why I'm able to go to her to help me understand what really happened to me. And then sometimes there's this play therapy that we used to do. When I used to do play therapy, I don't see kids anymore. But when I used to do play therapy, there was this therapy activity where you take lotion, and the child shows you where they have been hurt, and then you put lotion there. Sometimes it's old wounds, but you put lotion there, and then you say, where else? And then they show you again, then you put lotion there. And in that way, it also helps the child to understand their emotions, and also that they can be taken care of. It's not the end of the world. And also, you find that there's parents that are emotionally present, that when the child keeps growing and they're crying and all of that, they will say, name your emotions. How are you feeling? Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling happy? What is happening? And the child starts to understand that actually, when I'm feeling sad, this is how I take care of myself. I don't hurt others because I'm feeling sad. When I'm feeling angry, this is how I take care of myself. I don't hurt others when I am feeling like that. And in that way, the child then regulates their emotions. Another important thing is the base. The caregiver is always seen as the base. The mom, when I say caregiver, I'm referring to mom, I'm referring to grandmother, I'm referring to someone that was maternally there. And you find that when a child goes and plays, let's say there's a play date, and the kids go and play. Usually, a child that is securely attached would usually come back to mom, just even if it's them doing nothing to mom, just to maybe touch their knee or give them a hug, and then go back again and play. That is called a base. They come back to recharge and emotionally regulate, and then they go back into the world. Now, having to explain the healthy ways of regulating, and now getting into what this episode is about, which is emotional dysregulation of an adult. What happens is, when an adult didn't have a caregiver that was consistently there, or had someone, a caregiver that would respond harshly to emotions, or become angry, or end up punishing them for the emotions that they are feeling, they then end up not being able to understand the emotions that they are going through. And because there hasn't been a base, what then happens is some of the emotions can feel like death, to a point that at some points they would say, I feel so suicidal. Or they react impulsively because they cannot handle these emotions. These emotions are very scary, and sometimes they end up projecting them into other people because they become too hard for them to regulate. As an adult, you find that there's people that would consistently be shouting. They would consistently be shouting. There's also people that would give silent treatment. There's people that would punish, whether it's through hitting, whether it's through emotional abuse. You also find that because adults that did not learn on how to regulate their emotions, they have learned to find ways to survive in them. And sometimes it can bring up the emotional abuse, like your gaslighting, your guilt tripping, the silent treatment, those kind of things, because they don't know how to regulate this, and they had to learn the unhealthy way on how to regulate. You also find that there's also adults that are always in a dark place, and how they respond to their emotional dysregulation, on how they try to soothe themselves, is through hurting others, or responding impulsively to a point that they even start hurting themselves. You find that sometimes they would have a mood disorder, and some of them would have a personality disorder. Like, for example, patients that have borderline personality disorder usually comes from their attachment place, as much as there isn't so much evidence to this. But when you look at it from a psychodynamic point of view, it usually speaks about their attachments, and how when a child is not securely attached, this will result in them learning to regulate their emotions in a more unhealthy way. I think there is so much hope in learning how to regulate your emotions as an adult, but how it starts, it's by you having to go back to your own history on when did this emotional dysregulation start. And it usually starts in infancy, so it's very important to go back to that place of what kind of a relationship did I have with my own mom. When my mom passed away, who took care of my emotions? What kind of difficulties did I have in terms of navigating my emotions? When my mom abandoned me, or my caregiver abandoned me, how did I start taking care of my emotions? You also find that sometimes with emotionally dysregulated adults, they usually start regulating their emotions through alcohol or through smoking and all of that. And this happens because if we also go back to Freud, we become fixated in the years that we were traumatized. And there's this term that he uses called oral fixation, when the breast is taken out too early, and then the infant then starts to regulate themselves or soothe themselves in a way that everything goes to the mouth. That's why you find that there's adults that are still thumb sucking. There's adults that still smoke cigarettes. There's adults that drink alcohol as a way of self-soothing, and this comes from the breast being taken out. And if you look at the cigarette, the sucking is almost the same as the breast. If you look at alcohol, the bottle is a representation of a milk bottle, a person that didn't sit enough with the breast to a point that they were able to leave that stage. So they become traumatized in that stage and become fixated in that oral phase. All right. So I think the most important thing when it comes to learning how to regulate your emotions as an adult is to always try and go back into a space where you look at the roots on when things started, and healing the inner child, so that the inner child is able to express themselves and not show up in a way that is too reactive, or like for you not to become a ticking time bomb that with anything that happens you react. When you regulate yourself, you know that you are able to come back to yourself. And sometimes if you don't have a caregiver that took care of you, it's going back to the reparenting, having to now heal this child and start regulating your own emotions. Almost feels like you become your own parent, where you now go back to the gaps that were left by your parents and filling those in, so that you show up as an adult that is regulated. Sometimes you find that there's adults that have a mood disorder or anxiety and all of that. So it's important as well to go for therapy and to unpack all of this with a therapist that is experienced, so that you know if ever with where you are, do you need medication or not. I think also just sitting and writing a letter to your inner child is very important, because this helps you to understand what they went through, because writing makes you see stuff compared to just thinking about it, because you can manipulate the brain into suppressing certain things that are unpleasant. All right, I'm going to leave it there. I hope that you heal. I hope that you learn to be a regulated adult that is able to name their emotions and also try to take care of them without projecting them into other people, so that you are able to form healthy relationships. I hope this week results in you reflecting so much on yourself and some of the things that you do as an adult that more of temper tantrums and that you need to work on. All right, love and light.